Welcome everyone to Getting to Yes, Navigating Good Decision Making and Building Community in Owners Corporations. My name's Kate, for those of you who haven't met me yet. I'm the director at Let Me Be Frank. We're a sustainability and climate change agency who have had the absolute pleasure of working with the Strata Community Association of Victoria to bring you the High Life Expo. The High Life Expo for us was all about bringing sustainability and resilience advice that was specifically targeted to you, people who are living in, owning and working in apartment communities, because they're often a forgotten sector when we're talking about sustainability and climate resilience. So we're really aware of doing that. And tonight is our last High Life Expo event for the 2024 calendar at this point. Before we get too far into the agenda, obviously like to acknowledge that we're broadcasting today on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to elders past and present, and to any First Nations people who might be on the webinar tonight. For us at Let Me Be Frank, working with and standing with our First Nations communities is a really critical part of the climate justice work that we do. So we pay the rent, 1% of all our income goes to grassroots First Nations organisations, and we seek to kind of bring in First Nations wisdom into all the work that we do in this space. High Life Expo, whilst it was brought to you by Let Me Be Frank and Strata Communities Association, it would not have been possible without our primary sponsors and partners. So a big thank you to Melbourne Building Management, to Merribeck City Council, to the City of Yarra and the City of Stonington. Thank you all very much. And also our silver sponsors and partners as well, of whom there are way too many to name, but thank you all very, very much. We really, really appreciate it. We are recording today's session, so if you want to share it with others in your building, then we really, really encourage that, because today is all about sharing and working together in collaboration. The video will be online a bit later this week, so hopefully there'll be plenty of time for you to share that. In terms of today's agenda, I'm sure everyone who's on the call at the moment would be well aware that anytime we want to get decisions made in a strata kind of context, it requires us all to work together. It's not like standalone residential dwellings where there's only a smaller number of decision makers. There's lots of people involved in decisions in strata. So yes, we definitely need to follow the regulations in terms of decision making, but that isn't necessarily just following the regulations and going through the steps that we need to go through to get decisions made isn't going to generate the energy, the passion, the enthusiasm, the funds that we kind of need to unlock to sort of look at these sustainability and climate change solutions in this strata context. So to get things up off the ground, it requires this sort of, I guess, a really deliberative, collaborative process, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So we're going to talk a little bit about the regulatory aspects, but a lot more of it's going to be about community building and how do you kind of build that consensus decision making. So we are very lucky to be joined by three experts in this space who are going to draw on their lived experience and their professional expertise to talk about how you might get to that yes within the strata context. So we've got Julie McLean, who's the immediate past president of the Strata Communities Association of Victoria. And Julie, without Julie, our High Life Expo definitely wouldn't have gotten up off the ground. So thank you for pushing us all, Julie. So Julie's also an apartment owner, has experience as a strata manager and trainer, and she's going to talk to us and give us a bit of a snapshot about decision making as per the OC Act, and talk a little bit about that context. We've also got Jeanette, who's the director with Owners Corporation Network of Australia. Jeanette, also another driving force in terms of the thinking that went into the High Life Expo and how we pulled all that together. She's also the chair of the Victoria Point Owners Corporation, and she's going to share her insights across both those roles. And we had Jeanette just last week talking about the work that she's been doing to green up their building at Victoria Point, which was a great case study, which you can see on the High Life Expo website as well. And then we've got Elena oh my goodness, I wrote it down. Oh my God, I'm really struggling. After you said you were fine with it, Elena, who is the co-chair of Cohousing Australia. She's an architect and PhD candidate exploring housing as an urban commons. Elena's going to talk to us about what people living in strata can learn from that co-housing experience. So I know there's a huge amount of collaborative decision making that goes on in that context as well. I'm so sorry, Elena. Sorry. Now, in terms of using the software, if you haven't used the Zoom webinar before, we've got two kind of key functions that we're looking for people to draw on today. One is the Q&A section. So if you jump down into your, like you should have a toolbar at the bottom or sometimes at the top of your screen where you can actually type in your questions. So we'll be using those. Please type your questions as they come to you. We'll be holding all the questions to the end after all our presenters have gone, but I'll be filtering through those and posing those to the panel. We've got heaps of time for questions, so don't hesitate or hold back on any questions. It'd be great to hear from everyone. If you've got case studies or resources or just ideas that you'd like to share, you can pop those, or links, those sorts of things, pop those into the chat function. So that's another button down the bottom in terms of your menu. At another sort of space, it's a really great opportunity for you to share resources and things with other attendees on the call. I think that's all that administrative bits, and I can now officially hand over to Julie for her presentation. So I'm going to just give you control of the slides, Julie, and hand over. Wonderful, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. And yes, welcome everyone. It's great to see everyone along tonight. I'll definitely be giving a snapshot, as Kate suggested, of the regulatory process, very much a high-level view. So we're not going to quote. It's not going to be death by legislation, that's for sure. It's a great place to start in this conversation is with the journey. Because what I can say is it doesn't start with a decision to proceed. So we don't rush off to the meeting immediately. It usually starts in one of three ways. The first is a resident might seek permission to do something. And this, often that's coming in to the community garden. I want to plug my EV in. Where can I do that? Or I want to introduce some recycling programs. Alternatively, the owner-occupier may seek permission to do something, which includes all of those same things, plus double glaze the windows, maybe put solar panels on, wanting to change shower heads in the building or upgrade the lighting. Then alternatively, it can also come from a committee, a progressive committee who has got a 3- and 5-year plan that has identified ways that the building could improve its value, its footprint, and also decrease running costs. Eventually, and much later, it will end up with the collective owners making a decision. Strata is a great big melting pot with people from all walks of life, different backgrounds and beliefs, all owning and sharing land and building and community collectively. So getting to yes can be just as challenging as any of our own politics or world politics that we see. When considering any of these initial requests and forming the proposal, one of the key points is to separate the problems from the people and attack the problem and respect the people, negotiate based on interests and not on positions, which is something when we talk about climate change, often is the thing that comes between everyone. Look for shared interests. So we've got a difference between our owners and our investors, but we have a common interest in that as well. And also we've got to be open in thinking about changing our opinion based on facts. And that might, in particular, raise its head with things like EV and increased risk of fire, etc. So we need to look and listen to the facts when we're thinking about something like that. So who makes decisions in owners' corporations? Well, let's start at the beginning. It's managed by owners or under the direction of the lot owners. It's simple majority, special majority, or unanimous support of the owners. The owners elect a committee to manage under delegation on their behalf. All decisions of the committee are decisions of the collective. Strata owning and living is a democracy, and I think it's worth taking a minute to remind ourselves what a democracy means. Abraham Lincoln, of course, said that democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. In our case, the government is the Strata Collective, or the Owners Corporation, or body corporate. In a democracy, we consider our own self-interest as well as what is best for the common good. In a democracy, not only is a belief, but it's also a great power when it puts into practice. The collective can achieve amazing things. Democracy gives the people power to have a voice, which is important because we all want to be heard and we have the right and freedom to make our own choices. The power that we have to make our own choices comes with a lot of responsibility. And here I want to remind you, and I'm going to do it a few times, is of the superhero, Spider-Man. And he taught us that with great power comes great responsibility. So Spider-Man, remember that. In a democracy, our responsibility starts with us, and it means that we take responsibility for our actions. We chose to buy into Strata. We chose to live collectively. And so in so doing, then we choose to adequately repair and maintain our property and to maintain its value. And we chose to get on with people, which is a pretty important aspect of being in Strata. So how are decisions made then by our owners or our committee? Well, it's a formal process. It involves a voting by show of hands and recording that number for, against, and abstaining. Fortunately, there are some interim provisions that will help us if not enough people turn up. Or alternatively, it's a written ballot, just like at the election. And we get to tick, yes, no, and abstain. But there are no interim decisions for some matters when we're using a ballot. And one thing to remind everyone, a decision is not a string of emails. So that's important as well. It's a formal process. When considering the journey of getting to yes and knowing that decisions are made in 3 ways, at a general meeting, by ballot, or at a committee meeting, which is the best forum? The annual general meeting is held annually and is a statutory requirement, packed full of statutory decisions that must be made. It's a very busy meeting. This meeting is best for financial decisions. Interim decisions are available if not enough people turn up. Extraordinary general meeting. This is held as many times as the committee or the owners wish. It's not a statutory requirement. This meeting is best for explaining new things, embarking on a journey of change, often used for significant matters, and very much so for the decision of deciding a new colour scheme. Do not do that by ballot. Interim decisions available if not enough people turn up. The committee meeting can only make ordinary resolutions. The committee may have the power, but should it? Remember Spider-Man. Ballots are a decision-making tool, good for committees, not so good for matters where a discussion is needed. So the types of resolutions that we talk about is the ordinary. The lowest threshold is the ordinary resolution, and these are generally used for business as usual decisions like approving the budget, routine repairs and maintenance, and minor improvements. The voting process is a simple majority of those present and entitled to vote. Interim provision for decisions made at a meeting. No interim provision for decisions that are made by ballot. If 50% or more votes not returned, the motion fails. A special resolution. This is a higher threshold. It's used for major renovations and alterations, changes to bylaws, and significant financial decisions. The voting process requires 75% majority of all owners, interim provision for decisions made at meeting or by ballot. 50% must vote in favour and not more than 25% against. Hard to achieve in large schemes. And the highest threshold of all is unanimous resolution. And that's used for when you're tinkering with the plan. If you want to change the plan boundaries, changes to lot liability and entitlement, if you're seeking to wind up the owners corporation, if you want to purchase land or dispose of land, that requires your 100% agreement. Surprisingly, not many unanimous decisions are achieved. So which resolution do we need? Well, it depends. If you have a comprehensive maintenance plan, you may only need an ordinary resolution. If you don't have a comprehensive maintenance plan, you most likely will need a special resolution. The magic words highlighted in red on our slide is if included in the maintenance plan. So there's the clue. The legislation sets the bare minimum for a maintenance plan, not the gold standard. The plan is approved by ordinary resolution, committee, or general meeting. Remember Spider-Man. By ordinary resolution, the maintenance plan can be amended anytime by the committee or general meeting. Again, think Spider-Man. When might you amend the plan then? Well, the plan actually is to be reviewed every 12 months. And then anytime things have happened during that plan, you may need to amend it. For example, if you've swapped out your gas equipment and you've put in electrical new heat pumps, then you need to amend your plan. If you've added solar panels, you need to amend your plan. If you've replaced existing items ahead of time that's in your plan, then you need to amend your plan. If you have a 3 or a 5 year plan to modernise the building, electrify, make it smart communication, or make it more sustainable, then you need to amend your plan. So there are lots of reasons why you would want to amend your plan. A Strata manager asked me last week, would I recommend the committee or the Owners Corporation makes these decisions? My answer was, it depends. If the committee has the trust of the community, has a vision, and has communicated and reported regularly with the owners, then yes, the committee can and should continue with their plan. If the committee doesn't have the trust of their community, they haven't communicated the vision, or don't have one yet, then safety is the vote of the people. So the first expert advice that I recommend you get is to get the plan interpreted. Each plan is unique to that building, and boundaries are complex matters, and everything turns on the definition of common property and the definition of private property. It's the best advice you'll ever receive, and it will be a forever guide about who is responsible for what, as well as define clearly the ownership of certain areas. To understand who owns the roof, for example, will define if you are eligible for the current round of Vic Solar grants, as they only apply if the roof is common. If the roof is common, but you have no common electricity, then you may be thinking about a lease or a license of the roof to each owner so they can put on solar panels. Understanding the plan, what is common and what is private, is the best money you will ever spend. And once you have it, share it with everyone regularly, like at every AGM. We started with the big picture of a request for something. Let's look a little more closely about the process that leads to success. Firstly, our champion. This is the person who is probably seeking the permission for something out of self-interest, but is willing to use their passion or expertise or their special power and provide and lead the project. The committee is elected to make decisions on behalf of Strata community, but is usually busy with the day-to-day stuff. So the committee could harness this energy of our champion and drive the project forward. The committee can elect a subcommittee. The subcommittee can appoint, can co-opt other members to be on, like-minded members to come on to the subcommittee, and our champion could be the chair of this subcommittee. And the role of the subcommittee then is to make recommendations to the committee, to create survey questions for consultation, to research the proposal and start to get all the details in place. Then it's time to survey the residents and the owners and review feedback and make adjustments to the proposal. Then we finalise the proposal and circulate, and then we are ready to vote. Your Strata manager, if you have one, acts as secretary to the committee, calling meetings, sending out surveys, assembling documents, and issuing notices to vote. So top tips. Number one, don't ask unless you know the answer. 2, make sure your ducks are in a row before you seek the formal resolution to create time. Tip 3, consult widely with others, residents and experts. Tip 4, have a 3 and a 5-year plan and implement it. Tip 5, see tip 1.
Wonderful.
Yep. But there's a lot more to getting to yes than just the legislative process, and it's time to hear from the others.
Thanks so much,
Kate.
Julie. The questions are already going off. So I'm glad we've got lots of time for Q&A at the end of the session. So thanks, Julie. I am now going to hand over to Jeanette. I've just given you slide control. Jeanette, please go for it.
Great. Good evening. Thanks very much, Kate, and thanks, Julie. And as Kate said, I'm Jeanette Corcoran, and I'm here tonight to talk about the more practical aspects and ways of getting the green light, and yes, that pun is intended, for sustainability projects in residential strata. So I'm just running 2 screens here, so sorry for the clunkiness. So I'm also very pleased to be speaking on behalf of OCN, which is the Owners Corporation Network, the voice of strata owners and residents. And OCN is a companion to SCA, which Julie spoke on behalf of, which is the voice of strata management. So I'm very pleased also to let you know that OCN began about 20 years ago, and in New South Wales, and long active in the ACT as well. We're also looking at Victoria and Queensland to see how we can best utilise our services here. So on to residential strata. I'm sure we're all here well aware that residential strata is a mainstream way of living in Victoria and will only continue to grow. What we're also very well aware of is that we face significantly different challenges when we're engaging in sustainability upgrade projects than do our ground-bound cousins, as we like to call them. These differences are typically not well recognised nor well understood by many service providers or policymakers. For example, and these are just a few examples, our space limitations. Julie mentioned the rooftop solar project, and that was mainly focused at Tier 3 buildings, which were as similar to houses as the program could get. We also have complexity of shared infrastructure, so considered embedded networks and the complication that brings when we're looking at upgrading our sustainability in either water or electricity. Accurate and accessible documentation. It is an unfortunate experience of quite a few buildings that they don't have complete records of previous upgrades or how even wiring was originally done by the developer. This causes a lot of surprises and not great ones usually to occur when we're looking at upgrades. Also, intertwined financial capacity. So in these instances, it's not just whether you or I have the ability to pay, but it depends on every one of our neighbours to be able to support special levies or able to be able to combine to be able to undertake a significant sustainability initiative. And of course, there is the need for joint decision making. However, in combination with that, we also are well aware that there is growing pressure for sustainability. For those of you who attended the expo in person, you would have seen many stalls focused on new sustainability initiatives. So there's the get off gas, waste management, EV recharging, the sharing economy, and green infrastructure. And of course, there is a whole variety of projects that fall under each of those streams. For example, the get off gas can range from a conversion from cooktop gas top to hot water electrification. Waste management can range from the introduction of FOGO to decontamination of our waste streams. EV charging can range from the whole of building retrofit to developing, accessing or licensing agreements, sharing things such as a take it shelf to tool libraries, and green infrastructure, communal gardens to urban forests. Each one of those, however, has a different pathway to realisation. So the get off gas, for instance, if it's the cooktop conversion, we'll require broad-based support to be able to, for every lot to actually consider upgrading. Whereas hot water electrification, as Julie mentioned too, that can be a decision if it's in the maintenance plan that sits solely with the committee. Waste management, again, if you're looking at behaviour change there, which is what the decontamination sustainability projects typically involve, will require the buy-in of residents. So essentially major change initiatives. EV recharging, normally the first step there is a survey that people undertake to gauge the future demand for EV recharging in the building. So there's a number of ways that these things can actually work. So the question that I was asked to consider is what can be done to smooth the decision path? That is, how do we actually get to yes? Now, I thought a lot about this question because in my experience, it's the variables that really inform how you approach these types of change projects. For example, the types of residents that you have. Are they interested in investing for the future, or do you live in a building with a high percentage of rentals and a high turnover of rental accommodation? Also, what type of companion projects can you tap into? For example, there is the Global CookSafe Coalition, which brings together leading chefs to promote the use of induction cooking over gas top. Also, what about your local council? Are they doing anything that you can tap into? The devil is really in the detail for designing these types of projects. So the way that, upon reflection, the way that I looked at it is the way that we approached some major change projects. And the way that I thought is important is really about the framing. And for those of you who are here tonight who have been involved in change projects, be that at work or in community, know that there is a lot written about change projects, but just not in the OC context. So framing is key. There is the interaction, I think, of at least 3 elements there. So Julie has outlined the regulatory context. And also the High Life Expo was a great showcase for some of the sustainability solutions. And this area is rapidly emerging. So the missing bit is how OCs can bring these elements together. Now, I want to preface this by saying 2 things. And Julie, I think we're kind of one mind about these things. So first of all, ideally, this sits within a strategic framework of a building that identifies the direction the OC wishes to head in. And that is endorsed at the AGM and is coordinated with other plans. However, I've never really seen a great example of this. In my experience, residential strata is still and is primarily driven by the maintenance plan and is tempered by the annual budgetary process. In fact, in many smaller buildings, they don't have maintenance plans and some of them aren't required. So the reality is that most OCs do not operate in a curated context, but they still have to advance. So this is my suggestion. First of all, we frame it as a change project, purposely so. However, the catch here is that OCs, managers and building managers, while they're very experienced in managing maintenance projects and upgrades such as lift upgrades, they run tenders, they interrogate options, they oversee installation. But my experience is that these groups are much less skilled in behaviour and change management projects. So that's a gap. In a nutshell, change management offers a structured approach to transiting from where we are to where we want to be, and it incorporates purposely managing the human side of the transition. Unfortunately, there is very little guidance for our specific context. OCs are not work organisations, they don't have that kind of hierarchical structure. And neither are we communities. We have a different dynamic operating. So the message is that we can be informed, but not really sufficiently guided by a lot of the change management material that's around. Additionally, another key message is that if the sustainability project requires behaviour change to be successful, then we really need to incorporate human-centred design from the outset, which basically means working with empathy for the people that we are designing for. In essence, understand the change from their perspective. The other key point that I want to share is that before embarking on sustainability change initiatives, be really clear about the why and the who, and where the OC, particularly the committee, is positioned. So, for example, with cooktop gas conversion, where is that push coming from? Is it the committee? Is it an external thing that we're being pushed to introduce this? So you really need to be clear about who's leading it. And I like Julie's framing about the heroic resident that comes forward. Oftentimes we find that people approach the committee but aren't necessarily wishing to handle the project themselves. However, there's a myriad of different case studies that we can draw upon for that. The other point that I'd make is, regardless, every major change project needs a champion, and it's usually not the committee. It's not the whole committee. It can be a person. Oftentimes it's a person who joins the committee for that particular purpose. So, for example, I've seen quite a number of people who join a committee specifically for the purpose of actually installing EV recharging. Also, there's many ways to skin a cat. And so what I'm saying there is, don't be tied into the technology. Low tech might actually be a better way to achieve that change initiative. So these are the questions. Yes, for what? So there are different types of yes, and Julie has gone through the regulatory context. But there's also the types of yes that you need from broad-based support. So you need to think about it before you embark upon this. Yes, for what, and yes, from whom, and both internal and external. So, for example, if we're looking at that cooktop gas conversion again, you really need broad-based support. And how you grow that, basically, it can be assisted by external pressures, and I mentioned programs that you can tap into, but you also need to embark upon a long-term strategy about engaging people, engaging owners, talk to them about the different multi-pronged returns, so both economic, community, environment. You're going to talk to different people about their different value propositions. Also about the funding source. Don't forget about grant applications. And keeping in mind that grant applications will also need approval to apply, because essentially what you're doing is you're committing the OC to undertake a specific task or a specific set of tasks. The design, if you're actually looking at changing common property, there are external permits that you might need to consider. So town planning permits, building permits. If you're doing anything with waterproofing, remember certifications. And all of these take time, and they also require permission to be able to engage in doing that. So also, Julie has mentioned this before, approvals and permissions, particularly if it's going to involve a change of use. So I thought I might finish off by going through a greening project that I was involved with in my building. So this looks like a nice, neat sort of project. It basically was a 15 weeks construction project. The scope was to demolish and remove existing garden beds, construct 5 new garden beds with irrigation, upgrade the waterproofing. That was a huge part of this project. Construct new seating, install new lighting, plant 18 new trees, plant 5,000 native plantings. So project 15 weeks in duration, and it occurred starting in November 2022 and completing in July 2023. So our gardens have been completed for just over a year now. So this is just an aerial view of it. You can see it's reasonably significant. Also just noting that this is on the 4th floor podium. So it's technically a rooftop garden. So there are a lot of technical challenges involved in that. Now, I mentioned it was a 15-week project from beginning to end. It wasn't involving terribly new technology, tried and true, updated irrigation, upgraded waterproofing. So it was all challenging from that point of view. However, in terms of the journey of getting there, this is the view that we had. Essentially, we started this project, or started thinking about it, in 2017. And most of our effort was all about garnering support and garnering approvals and garnering permission to be able to undertake this. So this project, it really had its origins in the City of Melbourne offering an urban forest fund grant, which was essentially targeted at publicly accessible but privately owned land. So from 2017, what began was a round of, let's say, coffee conversations, began growing awareness within the committee about the benefits of doing this and how it's an opportunity that may never come again, how it's something that really could help us undertake something that we wouldn't be able to be in a position to do so if not for this. So at this time also we organised a budget allocation. So fortunately it was around of times when our maintenance plan was being looked at again. So we made sure that we actually included a line item there. We also presented at the AGM, and from 2017 all the way through, we had a regular item of presenting this project at the AGM. So roll forward to 2018. We also, we were aware that it was very important to engage our stakeholders from various walks of life about what really is involved in something like this. So we connected with Plan Australia, VicPol and City of Melbourne, and we hosted a women's safety walk that looked at our area, because if you don't know it, Victoria Point has a rather large neighbour in the form of Marvel Stadium. And so its use can range from big events through to daily commuters, through to nobody being around at all. So we use that information and also the process to build grassroots support, because most people will buy into a safety initiative. And we use those design information to help us develop a design and a way forward that was that had the mantra, where young women feel safe, everybody feels safe. We then got permission to submit a concept design. Now, part of our strategy was that we're not obligated at this stage, but we just want to see how far we can get. So roll forward 2019, we were selected for the City of Melbourne's largest urban forest grant. We really went to town on that. We promoted it. We wrote it in the local newspaper. It was in all our newsletters. We kind of used it as a point of celebration. We hadn't committed necessarily by that time yet. We hadn't got all the permissions, but it was really building that ongoing support. We then had to have permission to commission the technical designs. Then roll forward to COVID. Now that had a whole range of very long-term effects. The supply chains were disrupted, construction prices increased threefold. What that meant in terms of us having external masters is that we had to then go through a whole range of seeking to vary from both internal and external decision makers and groups. So just thinking about when you're looking at permissions and you're looking at external funding, just keep in mind that it draws out the time scale. So there's no such thing as free money. Again,
Yeah,
the same sort of thing.
Time, because the Q&A section is kind of building and building.
Sure. Well, actually, that pretty much.
Thank you. Sorry
about that, Kate. So anyway, that basically is the overview of our Victoria Point project, and just putting that lens over it again. And that's where we ended. So we did get our project through, and I will now hand over. So thanks very much, Kate. Cheers.
I'm so sorry. I was trying to work out whether I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Jeanette. Thank you. It's such a great case study, and really appreciate your experience there. Thank you very much. I'm super aware, as you were talking, more and more questions are coming in. So I want to make sure that we save plenty of time for all of that. Now, Elena, I am so sorry about fumbling through your name before. We made a big deal at the start about getting it right, and I was like wanting to make sure that I didn't. So Elena Pereyra, thank you so much for joining us from Cohousing Australia. I'm going to hand over to you, and I think I'm driving your slides, so please just let me know as you want me to move them along.
Okay. No worries. Thanks very much, Kate. Yeah, thanks so much everyone for having me along tonight. It's a bit odd not being able to see everybody else in the room. So sorry if if it seems a bit awkward. Yeah, I'm happy for you to jump to the next slide, Kate. So yeah, I just want to start by acknowledging I'm on Woiwurrung and Bunurong land. And also, I guess, just to acknowledge that we recognise we're in the context of a climate and biodiversity emergency, and also in the context of a housing crisis. And so I understand that that's possibly also why a lot of people have come along tonight as well. Next slide, please. I love this image because I feel like it paints a nice picture of co-housing. There's obviously the functionality of letterboxes, but also what's important is that they're co-located, which is just one small way that you can foster spontaneous interaction. What's nice though is that they're all individualized, and it just gives a little snapshot into the personality of the households. But they also work beautifully united as a whole. Next slide, thanks. Sometimes it can be hard to talk about co-housing and often easier to describe what it's not rather than what it is. So these are some of the terms that often get brought up. It's not a commune. People come towards co-housing because they're interested in social connection and community, but houses are assumed to be separate and sharing is a negotiated process. It's also not a kind of giant share house. Households are individual and self-contained, but there is extensive shared property and resources that are ingredients that help bring the community together. It's also not a gated community. Often co-housing projects are really conscious about having permeable boundaries, and they want to be a good neighbour, not just internally, but also externally. Retirement villages often have paid staff and services. In co-housing, the projects are designed and managed by the community, and that's an important part of the process. It's also not co-living. It's designed by the people. It's around a not-for-profit approach, which prioritizes use value rather than capital value. And while it is an intentional community, often in the Australian context, these are assumed to be regional and remote communities. And so co-housing is very much more a suburban and an urban proposition. Next slide, thanks. So these are just some of the key ideas: that it blends private homes with shared spaces, that it's designed for social interaction and community life, that it's co-designed with and for the residents, collectively managed by and for the residents, that resource sharing is designed so that people can spend less time. That can be less time and money, but also that people can access more because they can access things collectively, and that it's a good neighbour to the surrounding neighbourhood. Next slide. This is just a quick illustration that helps show some of that information graphically. It was adapted from a UK version with some amenities that might be a bit more relevant to our context, like a swimming pool and water tanks. But the main thing is that it prioritizes these shared spaces and shared activities, puts parking and other things to the periphery, and also that there's a large common house, which is a community hub and used for regular community dinners. Next slide, thanks. The biggest difference between co-housing and other forms of housing is possibly the prioritization of process. And I guess literally that the journey is more important than the destination. Two key phases is the co-design process, where the group comes together to initiate the project, and together they develop the design brief and the project plan. The second is the operational phase, where they create a co-governance process that allows them to manage those shared resources and cultivate a social program that suits their goals and aspirations. Next slide, thanks. And so it's about a process of getting from, I guess, our more typical model of how we conceptualize things, of kind of time and space, to a life experience that's better described as place and occasion. So from space to place, for example, we often have car-centric suburbs and often very inhospitable circulation spaces in apartment buildings, and sometimes cold and windy streets around them. In contrast, co-housing prioritises pedestrian-oriented spaces and generous circulation areas that encourage occupation and therefore increase spontaneous interaction. The example of time to occasion is that we often describe our lives as being very busy and we're always rushing. And instead, we want to try and cultivate a life and a culture of occasion, which is finding excuses to celebrate birthdays, holidays, Fridays, and also recognition that humans benefit from ritual. So co-housing groups often have common meals together in their calendar, because eating together and cooking together is considered community glue. And you might think that this is all very nice, but my corridor looks like this. I really encourage you to knock on your neighbours' doors and ask them how they think you can make these spaces more inviting and personable. It doesn't have to be crazy, but I think showing a little bit of your individual personality and creating that connection is really important. Next slide, thanks. So yeah, as I said, households are self-contained, but the shared spaces are really crucial for creating those opportunities for interaction. And these are not just from a utilitarian perspective, but because these things are used to maximize occasions to build trust and social capital, which are really key in helping you to make decisions collectively down the track. So finding ways to activate shared spaces and make these spaces feel like an extension of that private space helps create more permeable transition zones between public and private life. Next slide, thanks. So co-housing can be created in many different typologies. So whatever your strata housing typology is, there's probably an example of co-housing that is similar. And as I said, the shared spaces and the circulation spaces are the most important thing, because that's where you create that interaction and social capital. Next slide. I know that you might be thinking that in your context, the spaces aren't generous, they're not inviting, but you can really do little things and take inspiration from other places like street libraries that can help bring people together. So little libraries, pantries, clothes swap and coat libraries all help signal generosity and care within your housing context. Holding just very simple activities like pizza nights or street barbecues, where everyone brings a plate, can be very low budget and very impactful. And you can also host other more ephemeral activities like repair cafes or clothes swap events or a book club, because everybody knows that catching up about a book is much more usually about drinking wine and hanging out. Next slide, thanks. But how do you make it happen? Collective governance is often cited as a reason to fear co-housing, and in fact, usually any form of human association. This image is probably what springs to mind for a lot of people, and maybe you can see yourself represented there. But co-housing, there is a clear kind of process of establishing expectations. It's important that people can clearly understand what's expected of themselves and of others, so that no one feels unfairly burnt out. And I saw a recent article that suggested that obligation has a very negative connotation in Western society. I think Julie touched on this as well. But actually, research shows that people get a lot more pleasure out of gift giving than gift receiving, and that feeling purposeful and of value are very important to developing a sense of belonging and fulfillment. Next slide, thanks. And also Strata is not exempt from meetings. Even though they're called apartments, they're by no means apart, and you have a contractual governance obligation already. So you can use your co-location and existing collective responsibility to foster really positive outcomes in your buildings. Go out of your way to find out when birthdays are and swap emergency contacts. Asking for sugar on occasion from your neighbour might seem trivial, but it actually normalizes asking for help in your building. Otherwise, everyone thinks that they should be able to handle everything on their own, and that can be very isolating. So I encourage you to find excuses to meet your neighbours. And thank you, good slide transition. Yes, next slide. Sorry, I ruined it. The Strata Communities Network recommends that you have a strategic plan that reflects your values and aspirations for your community. So co-housing is really no different. Go to the people and find out what makes them angry, happy, alive, and think of fun and creative ways to bring that aliveness to where you live. You have to manage your building anyway, so how you do it is up to you. This is the Marie Kondo of community. Does it bring you joy? Next slide. And this is where I think owners corps and strata communities are well placed to be opportunities for placemaking. It's the space between apartments and the space between buildings that helps the city find its aliveness. Strata communities are perfectly positioned as a crucial fourth level of governance, a place where you can really get in touch with your place-based community and co-create a vision for the future that you want to see, and present that with a lot of credibility and conviction to other institutions that you might engage with, political or otherwise. Next slide. This is just a quick snapshot of some things that can help bring you together, and often they're part of social, environmental, economic, or other ideas. The top left is a community created for and by older women to support their senior years and to keep them out of aged care institutions for as long as possible. And look how happy they look. It can be for urban greening, for electrification, for food security, affordability, health. It can be batch cooking to share the load, or to be organised for the week for once. That's usually advice that I need to take. And it can be projects that double as social occasions. Next slide, thanks. So many co-housing groups use sociocracy. There's lots of online tools that can help you understand the process and how your organizational structure could be adapted. What's worth noting here is the distributed model. It doesn't have to be death by meeting. Having a diversity of tasks and projects means that people can opt into the things that interest them or that they want to learn about. But this also requires people to have trust in their neighbours that they're making good decisions on behalf of the whole community within those project groups. This is why social cohesion is most important, because it helps create that sense of obligation to prioritise the good of the group rather than personal agendas. And it also helps your neighbours, that your neighbours will also make decisions in good faith. And this is a lesson really for society, not just strata communities. Next slide, thanks. So the important thing to note, oh, sorry, yes, that one. So the important thing to note is that while co-housing is tenure agnostic, many co-housing groups are strata titled and do have an owners corp. But this diagram helps illustrate that it's important to make sure that the tail isn't wagging the dog, that the owners corp is a reflection of the community goals in life and not that the community has to curb its enthusiasm to comply with rules that were superimposed or are not relevant to the community's measure of success. Next slide, thanks. And this is just a quick project example of a co-housing group called Murundaka. It was built without solar panels, but the community decided that that was a priority for them. They had a strong mandate to implement the technology, but what was interesting is the process to achieve that outcome had multiple other pro-social outcomes. They hosted a solar festival. This was used to raise money for the project, but it was also to share knowledge with the broader community about the benefits of sustainable technology, to build knowledge and awareness of climate issues, to demonstrate how to be change agents, to eat together, to listen to music, and to have fun. What's important is that there's a role for everyone in the community to get excited about this project, not just the people who get excited about solar panels. So finding ways to know your neighbours and what's going to get them excited about a community project is not just about getting to yes, it's what makes getting to yes rewarding for everyone. Next slide. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you so much, Elena. And sorry for jumping the gun on a few of those slides.
No, you did well. Thank you.
I almost got there. There was just a few moments where I thought it was the same one. All right, now we've got heaps of time for Q&A, which is great because I can see there's lots of questions in there, and some of them are comments as well. But I might just work my way down. So if I just get all the other panel members to pop their mics and their cameras back on, and I will stop sharing the slides, and then we can open those up just for the last few at the end. Hopefully that all works from a technology perspective. There we go. Julie, I'll just get you to pop your video on again so we can see you, which would be great. I note that Amy in the back from my team's been in the background answering quite a few of those questions, and I might share some of that as well as we go because there were some really good resources in the chat function as well. Okay, so the first questions from Henk was around how can we engage absentee investor owners of OCs to become more involved in the shared governance and decision making instead of leaving it solely to the resident owners, as is in the case of many OCs. So this is a little bit around that responsibility obligation as an investor if you're not actually living in the community. Does anyone want to have a go at a bit of a strategy around that?
Well, I can start and then we could go round the room because I'm actually an investor owner. So I can speak from my own perspective on this one. And I know there's a myth about that investor owners don't want to do anything, and because they don't live on the, live in the scheme, that they just want to leave it to the people who live there, etc. And there's this, that's there's certain reasons for that too. But in terms of maintaining a property, absolutely, I'm interested in my value. I don't want to see the value of the property go down. I want to be able to charge a high rent, not exorbitant rent, but I mean, I want to charge a market value rent, which I can't do if the property is run down. I want to be able to, and more renters are asking for EV, for example. So when the EV topic comes up in my building, then I'm going to be someone who's supporting it because I already know that renters are already seeking these and other sustainable issues. So the way that I would be engaged, though, is it's a business case. So it's a return on investment. It's we pay this money out. It's a tax deduction for me, right? So you got to remind me that it's a tax deduction. if we do this in this year, you'll be able to claim this much back on your tax. You'll be able to advertise your property then with all of these extra benefits and, market comparison with other blocks on the street who have already got these things. They're charging this amount of rent. So it is that return on investment when you're talking to, it's a commercial aspect, if you like. Investors aren't against it. But they do need to see the numbers that talk to them, the words that talk to them, rather than other sorts of arguments.
I've been trying to advocate for a while now, because obviously we know rental providers, formerly known as landlords, often get a bit of a bad rap in terms of reputation, that there needs to be a campaign around the good ones. They're sort of that kind of shifting the social norms about what it means to be a good rental provider. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the minimum energy standards coming out in terms of the state government, the Victorian government consultations at the moment. But there's going to be some obligations there, as well as sort of staying ahead of the market, I think, as you're saying there, Julie.
Yes.
Jeanette or exactly. Elena, I don't know if either of you got anything to say there. Yep.
Yeah. My strong advice is don't treat investors as one homogenous group. You really need to know who it is, who your investors are. So are they locals? And you can talk to them, as Julie suggested. Are they international investors? Where are they located? So there's going to be different levels and different types and different approaches. You might have to think about translating communications if you actually have a high percentage of investors that live in a non-English speaking country. So that's my strong advice, is know who they are, and you're going to have different strategies for the different groups.
Yeah. Wonderful. The next question's around statutory requirements here, around consulting all owners on major decision making and costs. Is there a statutory requirement to consult everyone, Julie?
Well, let's look at it this way. The notice, or whatever it is you're sending out, has to go to everybody. So the answer is yes. You've got to involve everybody. Does that mean everyone comes? No. And does that mean you have to keep going back to trying to call a meeting so that you get 100%? You're never going to get 100%. So the answer is you have to invite everyone, but you can't make them come. People usually choose whether they're going to come or not to a meeting based on what's on the agenda, how the agenda is framed, for example. And so that might be, again, if you're appealing, you might need to create an agenda that appeals to the different makeup of your strata community, whether or not it's in different languages, that's another thing again. But like I mean is that, it could be to vote on something, but for investors, this is what it means to you. For owner occupiers, this is what it means for you. For, for overseas owners, this is what it means for you. So you may change your agenda around to try and create more interest in it by appealing that way, but you have to let everybody have an option to come and vote, but that doesn't mean they will.
Yeah, great. Now, Simon had a question around electronic polling, and there's been some really great resources shared in the chat, so we won't go into that, but he did have a follow-up question, was around, I guess, getting some clarity around where the approval thresholds are. So when you were talking about the three kind of different ways of making decisions, Julie, whether you could give a little bit more guidance from a sustainability perspective around where some of those decisions might sit.
Yeah, well, here in Victoria, we don't have a lower threshold at this point set for anything that requires a special resolution as they do in New South Wales. It is something that, has been put out there as a suggestion that we ought to, and we have seen a slight trend by government to identify that sustainability is different by saying that an owners corporation can't refuse unreasonably any kind of sustainable measure, but they haven't at this point dropped the threshold vote. So no, it's still the best bet for a special resolution if you're requiring to go for a special resolution, which potentially, first of all, is going to be around your funding, the amount of money you've got to spend. If that's more than twice the budget, then you're going to be in, unless you've popped it in your maintenance plan, as I've subtly suggested over there, then you're going to be
Very
in that special resolution, which means you need to get 50% voting in favour, and that even getting across that threshold is just a really big ask in large schemes.
Yeah, great. There's a great question here, because I think there was also some commentary, I think, earlier on in the Q&A about people not really understanding what they've bought into. And this comes up all the time in terms of what people are buying into when they buy into Strata and understanding that. But there's, and I think the reality is everyone who's on this call and hopefully watching this recording afterwards is actually actively trying to learn, because it is quite a complex space. But Jackie's asked a question around how to actually get that expert advice on who owns what, because it can be a little bit murky. And as you were saying,
yeah.
First thing you were saying, start with that. Who do they go to? Who do people call in that instance, Julie?
Ghostbusters. Fully movies tonight. There's really two good answers for that. One is that your plan of subdivision has been created by a land surveyor company, and if it's not too old, the first person that I would go back to is the land surveyor. So if you're on the committee, then seek a quote from that land surveyor to provide that interpretation. And the main reason is because the land surveyor has been on the project right from the ground up. They have created that plan based on the architecturals of the building. And so when they defined what would be median, exterior or interior of the boundary, they were looking at the actual construction of the building when they did that. Okay, so they are going to know, and predominantly because it's loaded in their software, they can just at a pin pull up those drawings and be able to say, well, this is why we did it, right? So they would be the first call if it's not too old, like within the last 10 years in particular. I would go there. Otherwise, going to a good legal advice lawyer, legal company. And here you want to go to a strata specialist. So lawyers specialise in certain areas. Just because they're a property lawyer does not mean that they are a strata lawyer. So definitely look for the expertise in strata or owners corporations. And there you'll find also they're split. There are those lawyers who specialise in the pre-plan stage, which is all about the town planning part. And then there are those who specialise in the operational aspects. So definitely it's the operational aspects, because they'll be all over the VCAT cases and they will know how boundaries have been interpreted, but they are unique to every building.
Brilliant. Thank you, Julie. Some consistency wouldn't go astray for some people, I'm sure.
Oh, I've asked for that too, don't worry.
A great question here from Virginia. And actually, I'd be really interested in your reflections on this, Elena, and also Jeanette in your current building, but around the general work of an owners committee, what voice can or should tenants have, or a tenant representative have, rather than just owners?
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. It's there's no problem about residents getting involved in subcommittees, and so to talk about their preference and that sort of thing. And in fact, in my building, we're actually kind of going through this at the moment. So there's strong groups that kind of say, well, if you don't fund it, how much say should you really have in decisions? Because if something doesn't cost you, then you don't have the natural limitations on saying to do this. But I suppose where we're kind of heading towards is that residents live in the building. They have an entitlement, and I think there's great input from residents in terms of the lived experience, what should be there. You know, whether I suppose we haven't cracked that nut yet. So it's no problem about currently having residents participate on subcommittees. How much decision making they get in terms of, you know, reviewing the insurance policies, going through the budget, sort of thing, is still a bit of a vexed question. Also keeping in mind that the resident really, their touch point is the lot owner. And the lot owner is the one that has the official say in the committee. So that's probably very unclear, but anyway, it is a vexed issue at the moment.
Yeah, great. What about in co-housing context? Have you got renters and tenants within that context from a governance perspective?
Yeah, I mean, projects are often kind of created at the start very much from a owner occupier or a resident occupier kind of perspective, but people's lives change, and so often there is a situation where there are renters, and sometimes the tenure model means that everybody is a renter, so it can be very diverse. But I think what's important, I mean, there's kind of two phases. Like, yes, are all of the processes around the owners court model and who technically has a right in the decision-making processes there. But there is the implementation of projects within the building context. And co-housing often likes to be intergenerational and diverse because different people bring different strengths and knowledge and capacities. And so you might find that there is just a different cohort within the community that are renters, and they bring energy that isn't otherwise present in the building. So finding ways for them to be able to be involved and feel a sense of ownership over the initiatives that you're trying to implement means that when it comes to the operational phase of those initiatives, you'll have that buy-in, and people will understand the process that the building went through to achieve them. And so they're more likely to act, in a pro-social way around those initiatives.
Yeah, great. In the High Life Expo on the Saturday, I was chatting to some members of an owners community. They'd had real trouble recruiting new members, and so they were trying to sort of retire and step away a little bit. And so they were actually restructuring things to allow renters to have a say and actually pull them in to actually doing some of the work. So I think there's also a bit of a load sharing, and it depends on the building and all those sorts of things and the makeup. But I think Jeanette, you're right. I think lots of people are sort of grappling with that question at the moment as well. So it's a good one to have in the backs of our minds. There's lots of questions. I'm just trying to filter through some of the ones that got a few votes. So there's a great question around conflict of interest. So how do you manage a conflict of interest with a committee member advocating improvements for their own benefit, and how that might be handled within an OC committee?
I'll start, and Jeanette, well, actually both will have some thoughts on this. One of the things that a couple of my committees have done was to, first of all, at the very first meeting, the chairperson leads a discussion on a team agreement and basically a code of conduct. Okay, so this is before anything has been discussed. And the importance of that is, of course, that you're not trying to then, after something has occurred, trying to then set the rules. So the important thing was, on the very first meeting the committee comes together, the chair leads the discussion around that, how we're going to play together nicely, how we're going to, and just simply how we're going to work together, and also those top things around that code of conduct. We in Victoria don't have a published code of conduct, but there is one in Queensland under the BCCM Act, and New Zealand has just brought one in under their legislation. There is nothing stopping a committee adopting either of those code of conducts or writing their own, because a committee in Victoria, other than the statutory requirements, can otherwise self-regulate. Okay, it has duties. The committee has duties which would, when you read the duties, imply that somebody with a conflict of interest could not perform and act in good faith and honestly if they were, using their position to otherwise gain a benefit. So that's where they would fall foul of the actual act itself. But the better way is that people actually come together and make an agreement before something happens.
Yeah.
Anyone else got a comment?
Yeah, actually, Julie, my building has a code of conduct that after each AGM we go through and do that as well. And we have a lot of, in a way they sound a bit twee, but the principles about the subcommittees operating as well. The mantra is, subcommittees recommend, the committee decides. So it just kind of strengthens those decision-making processes. Also, at the beginning of every committee meeting, we have a declaration for conflicts of interest. which I think is really important. So it actually goes on record about whether people have a conflict of interest, and the expectation is that they will excuse themselves from that particular decision-making segment. And in my experience, depending upon the strength and how active the committee is, they will call their colleague out on that if they have an invested interest. There's also the benefit principle, which gets a little bit more complicated. But if somebody is approving things that they receive a disproportionate benefit from, then that's something that can be looked at as well.
Right.
I would only add that this is one of the benefits of having a really well engaged community and an active owners corp, that you don't end up with a situation. I know that there are some where you'll just have a handful of people who really become sort of the default managers of the project and the processes, and that other people, they might not even be aware of some of the decisions that are being made on their behalf that unfairly kind of benefit a small group of people. So developing processes and engaging the broadest possible cohort to be within that conversation, I think, is really important. And also what I was talking about through the slides, that if you develop a strong sense of community and a strong sense of social cohesion, then you lose the social license, I think, to take advantage of people in that way. And those neighbours don't just become other people who happen to live in your building, but they become friends and they become your community. So you would be hopefully less inclined to take liberties where you might otherwise.
Or invoke Spider-Man potentially.
Yeah.
In that situation. Excellent, thank you. This is an interesting question. So there's an OC that's made up of 3 buildings. How does the committee need to have members from each of the 3 buildings? So should you have a chair looking after each building, which would, I imagine, end up being 3 separate OCs, or any advice or recommendations in that kind of context? Tricky.
Yeah, look, it's quite common because in Victoria we have what the other states call layered schemes. So we call it a multi-owners corporation, where there's an overarching one. So that's one. And then each of the buildings will most likely will represent what we call a limited owners corporation. So that scheme, no doubt, probably has 4 owners corporations, and they are each of them legal entities, and each of them are required to have a committee. It isn't easy, unfortunately, to try and do what we would think was the logical thing to do, potentially, to have the unlimited be the big committee, that's going to have make all the big decisions kind of thing, and have localized committees that just sort of do the operational aspects of their building. It's pretty much each one of them have to have the full committee and do and discuss pretty much all the same kind of business. So yep, in that case, there would be 4 committees, and that's a lot of volunteers. And maintaining those volunteers is also hard.
Yes.
And that's the case. Yeah, that's the case that it is in my building. We have 6 OCs. So OC1, who manages basically all the common property, and then 1 for each building. But again, whoever's asking this question, have a look at your plan of subdivision to see what is incorporated where. There are very strange things that are set up at times, and you might find you might have more OCs in existence than you're aware of at the moment. So check that. Yeah,
that's a good point.
Just looking through, I think there's some more things that are a little bit of a commentary, which I thought were worth sharing. One was around the local council introducing free plants for everyone. So to support the idea of local nature corridors, and that being a really key moment where everyone came together and sort of started to build formerly fractured community, which I think was a really nice idea. And Virginia also commented on that idea around toy libraries, tool libraries, clothing swaps, all that sort of stuff being really quite simple projects that actually, you know, can be quite transformative as well. So I just thought that they are obviously things that are resonating with the audience. I thought that was worth sharing with the panelists, which I thought was really nice, which leads into another question, which was really around how do you get the strata management companies to care, you know, to kind of really sort of start caring from a perspective of, I imagine community building, sustainability upgrades, that sort of idea. Anyone want to talk about that?
Well, the glib answer would be pay them more, but because the involvement in those projects, which is substantial, of course, is more than what the standard fee will be that the strata manager is delivering. And so it is a discussion to have with them. If you want them on board and you want them to lead the project, or you know you want them to do something around that, then you have to have that conversation with them about, well, what would their charge be to do that? It's certainly not included in the contract. It's a separate it would be a separate cost. And so you need to understand that before you set out on some of these things and, you know, and want or need your strata manager to go on the journey. There's, you know, most of them will be willing and able to do so, but it will be a question around how much time and therefore what is that cost going to be. We run at SCA, of course, many continuing professional development sessions on sustainability in particular, and they are well received, and many management companies attend those. So the appetite is there to be involved. And a peak in one of the awards that is given out every year is also for that as well. So there are companies who are winning every year the sustainability award. So definitely it's of interest and things that people do care and are passionate about. You just have to align yourself with one of those companies in that space.
Yeah. And so making that part of your procurement process to ask.
Correct.
Choosing your strategy.
Exactly.
In fact, Kate, that's what I was going to exactly say, is that select the strata company that aligns with your values. So when you go through and you do your tender or however you actually operate it, make that a specific thing in terms of, you know, how you are going to engage. And it's good to, as Julie said, you've got to be really clear about what's in the offer and what's out of the offer. You know, fuzziness does not make good friends. So, and when you're recruiting people, select a company that is maybe more, if you're interested in greening and that sort of thing, look at what they've done in the past. So if you've got somebody that it's just not resonating, it's not working, then I don't know how long your management agreement is, but see it out and then maybe look for somebody that aligns better with your values.
Yeah, great.
And Kate, can I just add, there was a question which I answered in the chat about KPIs for managers. One of the comments I'll make just on that is that the standard contract is a contract for the delivery of services that meet the compliance of the Owners Corporation Act and regulations. It very rarely, I mean, certainly the standard contract doesn't speak at all to KPIs other than those, okay? But generally, committees have a different expectation or have an expectation around when they might receive correspondence, when their notice of meeting is going to go out, when did they expect to see the minutes. These are all performance KPIs which need to be discussed. Sit down with your manager, draw up your list, your wish list of what it is you want. The manager will do as what, because they're not mind readers. They don't know what you're expecting. And likewise, you don't know what they're kind of doing because it's not articulated in the contract. Some contracts do include some performance criteria around those things, but the general pro forma doesn't. So if you are missing that, then create that with your manager, and then you've got a performance criteria to manage against.
Great.
I was just, I was just going to say, I mean, co-housing groups often, they, in the first instance, have a very kind of strong role in the co-governance aspect, but that doesn't mean that they don't outsource things when they need to. And I think that that's the important thing for strata communities and with a Owners Corp manager, to be very clear about what the role is of the OC manager, but also be very clear with your understanding and expectations of the OC committee, because there's a lot of times where we fall into this kind of transactional relationship, and the expectation is, oh, well, we're paying this money. As Julie said, often you're not paying enough actually for maybe what you want the Owners Corp manager to be doing, which is partly technical and in adherence with the regulation, but also increasingly more a community development type role. And so either find one that can do that, or decide what it is that is really important to you and work out who you need to engage to deliver that, or how you might do that together.
Yeah, that's really, really great point. I was just going to say there's one last question. I mean, there's quite a few, and we will do our best to sort of respond to these after the session, but there was just one last one that stuck out to me, which was around the definitive list. So I think you already talked about the fact there's no shared code of conduct in Victoria, so people can kind of adopt their own. But is there a really clear one resource, one guide where you can kind of get clarity around the owners committee responsibilities, Julie?
Yes, I was looking at that question. Other than what's on the Consumer Affairs website, which describes what they would like a committee to do, in terms of the roles of the chairperson and the roles of the secretary, which those 2 pages are actually quite good. But no, there isn't. SCA does run, however, 4 committee trainings a year. And in that course, it runs from 5:30 to 8:30, and we take you through all of those obligations, and it's free. We've just done one last week, so the next one's in the next 3 months away. But yeah, look out for that one and come along to that.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. That concludes our Q&A and everything that we've got time for this evening. I feel like we could have kept going for quite a while. I didn't even get to any of the questions that I'd written down. So, but thank you all very much. Now, but the journey doesn't end here for everyone who's on the call. We've built the High Life Expo website, you know, obviously off the back of the event and all the networking and the incredible resources that sort of already exists out there. So there's a whole heap of information on the High Life Expo website, and we imagine that will continue to sort of grow. So lots of information around making your apartment and your building more sustainable. So start there, definitely, if you're looking for the next steps on the journey. And as we mentioned, there's sort of case studies, and those are there's a few more coming over the next little while. I can't move my slides now. I just now wanted to say Nun Gudgeon, which is Wurundjeri Woiwurrung language for thank you. We've actually got a typo in that slide, but that's okay. To Julie, Jeanette and Elena, thank you so much for your time tonight and your expertise. And it was incredibly generous sharing all of that. So thank you very much. And also, just to finalise, as you can all imagine on the call, we're actually doing an evaluation as part of the High Life Expo. There's a few very simple, short questions to answer via a platform called Menti. You might be one of the platforms you might want to explore for some of your surveys yourself. So you can either jump on the link, you'll get a link in there via an email after the session as well, or you can just scan the QR code that's on your screen at the moment with your mobile phone and answer those questions really quickly. By filling out the evaluation form, you can go into the draw to win Mabu $150 voucher for either dinner at the restaurant in the CBD, or you can use that in their online shop. They've got great treats and things. You'll also get a copy of Tim Forsey's My Electric Home Handbook, which has information in there for apartments. It's been designed much more broadly, but it does kind of culminate quite a bit of information there for apartments and strata as well. And that is the end of our online seminar. So thank you all very much for coming along tonight. Thank you again to all our speakers. Nun Gudgeon, and good evening.